Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining NYU Metro Center for today's webinar, Prioritizing Equity in Our Schools as the World Returns to Normal. My name is Pharaoh Cranston. I am the Director of Communications for NYU Metro Center for Research, Equity, and the Transformation of Schools. I will be your moderator for today's discussion. We will begin our discussion shortly. However, before we begin, let me first address a few housekeeping items. Today's conversation will be recorded and made available to all webinar attendees in a few days. Closed caption services can be enabled for this webinar. We invite all our attendees to type into chat your name, the state where you're joining us from, and your educational role. We also encourage all of you to share questions with our panelists in the Q&A section of the discussion. If you're active on social media, please feel free to live tweet our discussion using the hashtag #PrioritizingEquity. Lastly, we will share relevant resources from our panelists in a post-event email. Now, with the housekeeping chores out of the way, let's get started and get to know our esteemed panelists for today's discussion. Wenemo Okoya, Director, Center for Strategic Solutions at NYU Metro Center. Matt Gonzalez, Director, Education Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative at NYU Metro Center. And last but not least, Fabian Doucet, Executive Director, NYU Metro Center. Panelists, good to see you. Let us begin. Please share your name, your role at Metro Center, and most importantly, let us know what motivates you to do this work. Wenemo, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, Pharaoh, for the introduction. Really excited to be here with y'all. Can't see you, but I feel the energy from the intros in the chat. My name is Wenemo Okoya. I use she, her pronouns, Director of CSS. And what motivates me around this conversation, around this work, are the students I've worked with over the last decade plus. I started my career, I see some New Jersey people here, as a classroom teacher in Newark, and have evolved in my research and practice, all serving Black and Brown communities. So it's those students and their families and the educators that serve them that drive me.
Okay. Matt, how about you?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Pharaoh. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Yeah, wish I could see y'all, but feel the vibes in the chat. Matt Gonzalez, use he, him pronouns. Director of EJ Rock, which is the Education Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative. Also was formerly director of the Integration and Innovation Initiative, which was on the slide. And we'll talk a little bit more about the merger of those two entities together. What motivates me is, like young folks, like Wenemo said, really, I'm very privileged to get to be in space and community with a lot of young organizers, activists who are directly impacted by the conversations that we're having today and the conversations that will be continuing to be had in adult spaces. And so really, my mission and goal in life is to really honor and center their priorities and values and be a voice as much as possible for them and the priorities around education justice. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Fabian, how would you answer that question?
Hi, everyone. Fabienne Doucet. I use she, her pronouns. And as Pharaoh mentioned, I am the Executive Director of Metro. It's really wonderful to be here with everyone. So much like my colleagues, the young people absolutely are at the core of why I'm drawn to this work and have continued to remain in this field for a couple of decades now. And I also would say that educators are a big reason why I do this work, wanting to support educators, recognizing how little they are valued in our society, but understanding also the importance of their work and the significance of what they do. So young people, communities and families, and also our wonderful educators out there.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, panelists. Let's get started with our first question. NYU Metro Center's work focuses on youth who have been historically marginalized in educational spaces. In order to ground this conversation, it is important to start by defining some essential terms. Fabian, could you get us started by explaining what is meant by equity and school transformation?
You're on mute.
Thank you. I clicked it, but it didn't go through. Okay. Thanks for that question. And because I do think it's really important to be clear on what we mean when we use words, because words mean things. And equity for us, I think we use a definition that is in some ways quite simple, which is everybody gets what they need, right? So when we think about different students, coming from all different kinds of stories and histories and backgrounds and peoples and so forth, we want every student to have exactly what they need in order to be able to thrive. And what that means is that sometimes some people will get a few more things than other people, and sometimes folks will get things that look different than what other people get. But the idea is that you're getting what it is that you need to thrive. We all know that historically, communities that have been on the margins, communities that are Black and brown, that are poor, that are not citizens of the United States, that are linguistically diverse, all these different kind of aspects, sexual marginalization based on gender, all kinds of things, right? Abilities and so forth, that these are folks that have been sort of deemed not as worthy or not as important or not as central or expendable, right? As unfortunately, as we saw in the alarming conversations around the pandemic, is sort of we realized that some people believe that some of us are actually expendable. So equity for us is about ensuring that everybody gets what they need, right? There's enough for everyone, right? So we operate not from a mindset of scarcity, but from a mindset that there is enough for everyone if we have the will, and that's the key. And as far as transformation, we want to be bold, right? We know that change is difficult to come by and that it takes a while for things to really, to move the needle sometimes. But we don't want to let that stop us from having big imaginations, because nothing has ever changed because people kept their dreams small, right? So we really emphasize transformation because we want to dream big. We want to imagine that the future can look completely different than today.
Thank you, Fabian, for that response. Matt, can you please define critical race theory and culturally responsive and sustaining education?
Yeah, thanks for giving me the easy ones, Pharaoh. Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole definition, there's some definitions that y'all should look up, but I think in terms of critical race theory, just to keep it very simple, because there's a lot of things going around about what CRT or critical race theory really is, it is a legal and academic lens used mostly in law schools or higher educational institutions that really just encourages folks to understand and think about the ways that race has been used as a tool to uphold and create systems of privilege and systems of vulnerability. I think so much of what Fabian was just talking about, right? Like using an analysis tool to understand the ways in which race has been used to create equality, inequality, stratification, et cetera. So that's, I think, just the quick and easy definition of it. What it also is the new boogeyman that has been created by the right wing to actually, I think, to serve a couple of goals. One is to ultimately undermine the public's belief in public education. And so really to create a wedge between the public and our public schools. But also, we've seen this in the version of legislation that is targeting what's so-called CRT, but anything actually that is focused on acknowledging or addressing or visualizing race, folks from different marginalized backgrounds, and the LGBTQIA community in particular. CRT has now been used to kind of umbrella term a lot of diversity and equity initiatives and really place them under assault. And so CRT is certainly something that we're seeing in academic spaces. It's also become a politicized term and set of ideas that have actually been really damaging and harmful. On the other side of this coin, I would argue that culturally responsive and sustaining education is really the antidote to a lot of this venomous and kind of poisonous ways of thinking. And so, again, there's a series of definitions, and really will encourage folks to read the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings, really to build some foundational understanding about culturally responsive education. But in a nutshell, is this belief that students, we should ensure that all students have opportunities to achieve academically, right? We should create rigorous educational spaces for all young folks. We should also be building materials and educational spaces that are culturally competent, right? That like connect to the lives and identities of young people. And then this idea that we actually, education is not just this neutral space, right? We're not just talking about the world in a neutral context. So there needs to be a socio-political consciousness built around all the educational materials and conversations we're having. And so that's the culturally responsive education foundation that I think folks really like. That's really valuable to have that grounding. The work has evolved through the work of Sammy Alim and Django Paris to really expand the ways of thinking, not just about let's make this relevant to Black and Brown kids, but let's actually take what is in our communities already, the cultural funds of knowledge that our young people bring and our communities bring, and honor and value those priorities, right? And center cultures and identities in the school cultural practices and curriculum. And so really, the work of building culturally relevant practices and protocols is like foundational. The sustainable work is like, how do we continue building those practices? How do we build sustainable infrastructure to support teachers to do that work, and to train teachers to do that work, and to invite young people and their communities and their parents into the conversation? So the work about, I always tell people it ain't rocket science, but it takes intention, right? And so culturally responsive education is really about treating young people like they're humans and like they're valuable, and like their families and communities to deserve to have the most beautiful educational spaces that we can create in our system. And I think that's, taking it really plainly, like giving everyone what they need and the ways that they need it.
I hear that. Wonderful. Can you please define anti-racist practices and socio-emotional learning?
Feels like Jeopardy, but yeah, I'm ready. So I'm gonna define them separately and then bring them together, because I think what we need to be striving towards is anti-racist social emotional learning in schools. So anti-racism, I like to define it as designing for the most marginalized. And in the context of this country, the most marginalized are Black, trans people with disabilities, who and women in particular, young women in particular, right? So to be anti-racist means to design and recognize that the systems were not designed for the most marginalized, and being really intentional about building in beliefs, practices, systems, policies that benefit the most marginalized, and then trusting that those policies and practices and beliefs also benefit those of us who have more power and privilege. And I like to use analogies, and most of them are around food, but I'm going to use this one around a barbecue that I think hits pretty well. So right, when I'm planning a barbecue, if I'm trying to build for the most marginalized, I'm going to choose vegetarian options first, right? Or vegan options first. So I'm planning my barbecue around my vegan brothers, sisters, and siblings, so that they can eat when they're there. And then I'll add on meat options afterwards. So then my meat eating homies are fine, but I make sure that my vegan folks are served, right? And they feel like this is something that was built for them. But my carnivores were not harmed in the process. And I think that's something that, like, when folks hear anti-racism, they think like, oh, you're taking away from me to give to someone else. So I think, like, just because I've built something for my vegan folks that are coming into my home does not mean that it's not a great party for my carnivore brothers, sisters, siblings, right? So that's like kind of the analogy that I think that works really well for anti-racism. And so social emotional learning is, I think, really building for and thinking about and considering the humanity of young people and the skills they need to connect and make decisions. I think sometimes we overcomplicate that, but like really in order to survive and thrive in this world, we need to connect with other people like ourselves, similar to ourselves, and we need to be able to make responsible decisions. Obviously, academics are part of that, but that's the way that I define social emotional learning pretty simply. And so when I think about anti-racist social emotional learning, I'm thinking about designing skill building activities, curricula, experiences in schools that consider students that are the most marginalized, right? So vegetarian forward interventions in schools. So I'm making light of this, but when we think about our students, right, we should really be designing our entire school system around the young people who are the most marginalized, who have least access, are vegans in this analogy. So
Oh, you had me at food, but that's another discussion. Fabian, as executive director, again, in light of the conversation and the terms we just defined, what is your vision for the NYU Metro Center, and what is the role of the center within this national climate right now?
So first of all, everybody here can see how lucky I am, right? To be working with the dopest people in the world. Thank you so much, Matt and Wenemo, and Pharaoh, for just being yourselves. Yes, Cindy and Paloma, who are here providing support. Just everybody's awesome. But I just really appreciate those responses that you all shared and these wonderful questions that you've crafted, Pharaoh. So my vision for the Metro Center, as some of you may know, I started as executive director in January, so I'm still pretty new to this role, but the Metro Center has been around for 43 years. And so we have a long legacy and some wonderful, we've been founded on some wonderful roots that have always centered equity and have always centered young people and the young people who tend to be at the margins. So what I would like to see for Metro's next iteration, as I like to say, because I'm just continuing to build on what my predecessors have done. So for this next iteration, I really want that people, when people think of the Metro Center, that what they think of in a nutshell is this is where you come to build capacity in whatever work that you do. I'm a researcher, I'm a teacher, I'm a principal, I'm a superintendent, I am a doctoral student. Whatever it is in the work that you do, this is where you come to build capacity to learn to center equity, anti-racism, and community in your work. That you are thinking always of how is my work centered in equity? How is my work centered in community? How is my work centered in anti-racism? So that's sort of like the really brief and short answer is you know, rather than kind of trying to explain a lot of different things about the way that Metro is structured or the way that it operates, I just want people to think, man, I have a project and I'm trying to figure out how to understand, you know, I don't know, science curriculum, right? And I want to make that science curriculum more equitable. I want people to think, okay, the Metro Center is the place that you turn to. So that's what I hope to see, in addition to having some visions about the way that Metro Center operates and collaborates with one another. We are structured, we're lucky enough to be this amazing, basically collaborative of multiple subunits that have their own functions and that do their own things, right? You heard Wenemo is the director of the Center for Strategic Solutions. Matt is the director of the Educational Justice and Research Organizing Collaborative and formerly of I3. So what does that mean, right? It means that these folks are leading specific projects with specific goals, intentions, and audiences, but that all of us work together to make one Metro Center. And we want that Metro Center trunk, that core that all the branches feed off of, to be really strong. So that's also part of this broader vision that I have, is to allow for a really strong trunk that can really provide a strong base for these other branches and for their work, and to facilitate collaboration among them. I also really want to elevate Metro's profile in research more. I think we're very well known for our work in schools, our direct services work, and I'm looking forward to having some more visibility as well to the research contributions that we make. And that's also part of my vision, because I think that all of these things work together. I think for me, such an important piece of all the work that we do is that we don't work in silos. Whether we're policymakers, whether we're practitioners, whether we're researchers, we really all need to be very much in close collaboration and contact and conversation with each other. And that's one of the beauties that the Metro Center offers, because we are a research center at a university, yes, but we also provide direct services, and we also have people with boots on the ground, and we have partners who are literally doing work in communities. And so that symbiosis, that way of operating as a collective is, to me, what makes Metro so beautiful and what I want to continue to elevate. And because of where we are right now in our country, we are definitely not post-pandemic, but we are in a different place in the pandemic. The early days of the pandemic, the early months of the pandemic brought a lot of shed light for a lot of people who maybe had not been paying attention before to the inequities in our society that many of us already knew existed. But even for us who knew that they existed, witnessing the violence with which those things were deployed right onto literal people's lives, onto their families, onto their communities, watching the almost like a tsunami, right, of just like destruction of people's lives and communities and jobs and all these kinds of things. That was just so hard to watch. We are at a different place now. I hope that we've learned some things. I feel like I've learned some things, and I know that at Metro we've learned a lot. And so we are trying now, and I think this is where we are, to the second part of your question, Pharaoh, is I think where we are as Metro at this point is that we are in a position to really help our colleagues across the board in the country build from where we are, so that we're not repeating the sins of our past and not just going back to normal. Going back to normal can mean many things. It can mean no longer having to wear a mask when I go to the grocery store, and that would be lovely. But what I don't want to see normal is young people not getting what they need in schools, young people being disrespected, families and communities not being accounted for, right? These things continuing. So there are certain aspects of normalcy that we all crave and that we can all agree on, right? I'm sure. But we also want to make sure to be that voice and that conscience and that constant, nag, little voice saying, we don't want that to go back to the way that it was before, right? We want to make sure that we are envisioning something very different for the future. And I think that's where the Metro Center sits, is to be able to really offer that to our colleagues and collaborators and community members.
Oh, indeed. The importance of building community and collaborating those around us. As I say that, please, again, remember, if you have questions for our panelists, if you want to be a part of this conversation, by all means, please direct your questions to the Q&A box here in our conversation. And if you're on social media, again, you can live tweet anything of the many urgent essential points that we've already made this evening at using the hashtag prioritizing equity. Right, Wenwell, the next question is for you. What is your vision for the Center for Strategic Solutions? And moreover, what can CSS contribute in this moment to support educators?
Yeah, so I'll say part of why I came to CSS was because of Fabienne's vision for, Metro being a community and a hub, and because of the 45 years of history of us doing that and being that, and also, looking forward from that. So my vision fits cleanly into what she shared, but to just be a bit more specific, my background is obviously as a teacher, but then I've kind of cleanly sat at the intersection of health and education, and I've done a lot of research on trauma and healing. And what I've come to recognize prior to the pandemic is that schools and institutions can be instruments of healing and can be centers of healing and community. And also, one of the biggest factors in overcoming adverse experiences is connection with other human beings and relationship. So in terms of CSS, a lot of the work that we do is, yes, we definitely go out and contract with schools and school districts to support educators. And I want to continue to do that, to meet folks where they are and provide support. But I also want to make sure that we're also bringing people together so that they're sharing knowledge, they're sharing their experiences, they're learning with each other and getting the critical connection that they need. So I really want educators in particular to see CSS as a place they can come to be cared for, to be heard, to be valued, and to share information with each other with regard to prioritizing equity for our students, and also making sure that they're caring for and supporting each other, because you cannot pour from an empty cup. So unless we're supporting the healing and caring for each other, this work is not going to be sustainable. We keep hearing about the record numbers of educators leaving the classroom, and it's just kind of like a talking point. But what is the anecdote to that? And the anecdote to that is really connection. Yes, I believe people need to be paid more and be compensated, but education has been a field that's been an issue in education for a while. I think what's changed a lot in the last several years is the lack of opportunities for connection. So I just really want CSS to be a place where folks can come together to support the healing of one another, intellectually, but also emotionally, spiritually, in all the ways that they need to.
Thank you. Thank you. Matt, similar question. Your vision for the Education Justice Research and Organizing Collaborative, and again, specifically, how does EJ Rock speak to this moment?
Sure. Yeah. Also, just really exciting. I've gotten to hear versions of Fabian Wenemo's responses, but just it's such a privilege to get to hear and share this space with you too, and think about how the vision that I'm going to talk about really is connected to all of this, right? And so, just to give a little context, I came to Metro Center 6 months before the pandemic. And my goal was to build an integration center, right? And so a lot of work around desegregation integration was evolving, and I got to play a really huge role in that in New York City and nationally, and was asked to come and start to build a technical center to support that work. Obviously, during the pandemic, folks were not thinking about admissions policy. We're not thinking about how segregation necessarily impacted, the pandemic, although there was a lot of deep connections to be made. Since I was a teenager, I've been an organizer. I've been fighting for something, right? And over the years have had the privilege to work in various cities and states, and now for the last almost 10 years in New York City, working in partnership with a lot of education justice advocates and organizers at a previous organization I was at. And so, when I came to Metro Center, part of my work naturally was already about collaborating with the EJ Rock version that predated my role in it. And so there was already natural collaborations. And over the pandemic, because our work just started to fold into itself so much, we decided as a team, and so the vision I'm trying to articulate is not really just my vision, right? It's actually a vision that we've co-created with the rest of the team on EJ Rock, which includes amazing activists, organizers, and policy nerds like myself, right? And so for us, the vision is really about serving two purposes. The first one is the historic mission of EJ Rock and really our community organizing and engagement work, which is really about being a strategic resource to community-based organizations, which can be young people, which we house many organizations at Metro Center, from the Urban Youth Collaborative to the Coalition for Educational Justice, to Integrate NYC. So really being at service to the education justice movement. And that can look like us providing strategic support, writing policy memos, providing rapid response research, just like helping folks strategize around policy and practice. And so my goal and commitment is to ensure that we always play that role at the local level, at the state level, at national levels as well, so that we can maintain this bridge between communities and institutions, right? Because I think part of why I came to the Metro Center was because I had looked at many other universities who had very beautiful words on websites about being connected to community, but many of them, I attended some of those, right, that were not actually doing work in communities, right? And so what I understood as an external person, I was coming to the Metro Center offices as an advocate, right, and being invited into the space, and then being given space and resources to do this work. And so for me, I think that work is super core and critical, and it's why Metro Center has this reputation for doing deep racial justice and racial equity and truly transformational work. And so that's part of the mission and commitment that I want EJ Rock to live up to and to maintain. for my own personal, and the other side of bridging the work with the Integration and Innovation Initiative, which is I3, is really about creating another, like a technical resource center that is specifically focused on building capacity on the policy level, on the research level for schools and districts, right? And so the traditional EJ Rock was really about being in community with folks. The kind of EJ Rock 2.0 version is really about helping bridge the community work we do with educational spaces, because I truly believe, as a former educator and as someone who's worked in and outside of schools and communities, if we don't bridge those connections, then we're actually never really going to get to like helping define and create educational spaces that honor and value and love our young people. And so, you know, the work is really about building and supporting sustainable movements outside of schools, and then also working on building the bridge between those two entities, and then making sure that when we're doing curriculum work inside of a school, it is done in partnership with young people and their parents and caregivers, right? When we're thinking about building a policy, an admissions policy at a school, it needs to be done in partnership with community, right? And so I think for me, it's really about bridging the community-based organizing work that EJ Rock has been so amazing at, and my commitment to making sure that schools are actually being responsive to communities and doing the work that brings justice to our young folks and their families. And so my hope is that that's the work that we get to kind of manifest in this moment and going forward. I'll just say, you know, in terms of what's happening right now, we've been, you know, organizing with everyone and everywhere possible at the local level to fight budget cuts to our city, to support young people in fighting for police-free schools, to support campaigns for culturally responsive education and desegregation. That's like ongoing and will continue. We've also been playing a new and emerging role at the national level, really trying to push back against the like anti-public education and like assault on the free speech of teachers that has been under this anti-CRT umbrella campaign, right? And so we've been in partnership with and created this organization called Heal Together, which is part of a partnership with Race Forward, that is really trying to mount fight back campaigns and really center education justice as the antidote, right? Because it's not just about playing whack-a-mole with all these wild pieces of legislation. It's actually saying, like, what do we stand for and what do we fight for, and really trying to help community members in New York City and across the country shape those conversations and take those to school boards, take those to their schools, and really start to build coalitions together. And so there's a lot of things we're doing, and that's kind of a short and sweet version of it.
Well, listen, it's vital work. The idea is building capacity in community and in partnership with community and having that responsiveness in school settings. With that said, how can we sustain anti-racist, culturally responsive, sustaining practices in our schools? Wait a moment, let's start with you.
Okay, I thought you were gonna go someone else. I'm ready though. So in terms of sustaining this work, I think it's really about prioritizing it, right? We would never not sustain academics. We would never be like, how are we gonna sustain academics in schools, right? I guess we gotta teach reading. Like we would never be like, there's gotta be time to do reading. If we elevate this work as important and critical for students' livelihood, right? So like, even just to kind of bring in a little bit of research, the research supports that young people's social emotional development and their sense of belonging in schools is as important, if not more important, as their academics for their later life success, right? And whether or not they feel supported in terms of if they've been exposed to trauma, like whether we know that if we don't intervene on those experiences at this critical age, that there's going to be a lot more healing and investment they have to do later in their lives. So I feel like it sounds like I'm dumbing it down a little bit, but really just elevating the importance of equity work. When I say equity, I mean really developing schools and systems that center young people's sense of belonging. I think it's that simple. It's just lifting it up on the same level as we do academics.
Okay. Fabian, what can you add to that?
I love that answer. I'll add that at this point, I may sound like a broken record, but I also will add that community is a huge piece of it for because we are in a marathon, and so in order to be able to sustain and to remain engaged and to not lose steam, we need each other. And we can't do it without each other, because at some point I'm going to need to stop and get a drink, right? And at some point Matt's going to need to stop and stretch. And if we don't have each other to say, you know what, I'll hold the baton while you take care of that, and you take care of yourself, and you take care of your community, we need that. So we really need each other. So for me, sustaining is all about how we connect with each other and how we support and help each other to stay in it for the long haul. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to be switching off my camera, but I'm still here, folks.
Okay. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, echo everything that Fabian and Wenemo just discussed. I mean, I think at this point, I think there's a couple things one, I think we've all learned a lot, but I think there was a sorely and I think in the long run of things, we're gonna look back and say we really, the collective, we missed a huge opportunity to really reshape the way we do things. It's like it eats at me. I think and I don't know that we've missed the window completely, but there was a moment where we weren't forcing kids to take standardized tests, and putting them through this churn, right? That was just the way things were, right? And a little hope that we could actually really shift priorities. And so I think I'm very saddened that we didn't take those opportunities, but again, the collective we. And so I think what we need is to understand and recognize that our institutions basically structurally failed all of our most marginalized and vulnerable communities for the last hundreds of years, but really more blatantly, right, over the last couple of years, right? And so young folks and their families and parents have seen that these many of the institutions that they're relying upon don't care about them, right? And so I think what we need collectively is to heal and to process. And I don't even know where and when that happens or how that happens, right? But I think we really need to process what has happened and what we've been through as a collective, right? What we've put the teachers through, right? What we've put all school staff members through. I know a principal who's had COVID 3 times, right? And very casually was just this is my 3rd time. I'm bro, we don't even know what that means, right? We don't even know, right? And so I think that we need some space and time to really heal and process what has happened. And I think in that space, we also need to figure out where joy exists in these spaces and educational institutions and really center that, right? And I think what I've understood about living in this world is for me, one of the most potent antidotes to white supremacy is our joy, right? It's the joy that Black and brown folks bring and represent unapologetically. And so wherever we can center and build that into our practice, our pedagogy, our policy structures. I've had a lot of joy writing policy with young people, right? I've had a lot of joy training teachers on culturally responsive practices. And I feel where we can center joy in those spaces, I think that's what we need, along with all the connection and community that was just described. But I think we have to really acknowledge how painful and how we're still processing repetitive trauma and not really actually addressing it. And joy, I think there needs to be some joy somewhere at some point.
I hear that. Again, we're coming close to hearing from our audience. So again, if you haven't already, please direct your questions to the Q&A box here on the chat. If you're on social media, again, you can live tweet our discussion using the hashtag prioritizing equity. Matt, you made the point about how we go forward from here in speaking to educators as they make their plan for the 2022 academic year. What advice would you share with folks working towards and committed to the racial equity and social justice work we mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd pick up on where I left off, right? I think a couple of things. One, I and probably everyone on this screen and probably everyone here, right, is experiencing some level of burnout, right? And that's not sustainable. And so I think for us, just like really finding like what our capacities look like emotionally, you know, mentally and physically, right? Like really reassessing like what our capacities look like so that we can, this fight ain't gonna be over anytime soon, right? And so we really need us to be okay for the long haul, right? And so I think really figuring out what sustainability and rest and restoration looks like for us, I think is really critical in this moment, especially as we're about to hit the summer. And I hope folks are about to have a hot girl summer out there, me included. And then I would say, as we're thinking about getting back together, you know, I've always, you know, I always tell people that like I was the only person doing restorative justice in my school when I was a middle school teacher, and everyone was like, he's weird, like what I was the weird guy that did RJ, right? And like I felt isolated, and part of why I left the school was because, and left teaching really was because I didn't find the community that Wenema was talking about, right? And so I've always just tell folks, you got to find a squad, right? And that includes your colleagues, your fellow educators who are about that life, who are really willing to do the work together. And then you got to build coalition, right? And so young folks were my partners, their parents were my partners when I was trying to push for bigger work outside of my classroom. So I think finding the squad and the coalition of stakeholders, I think, is really key as we're moving forward. Yeah, I guess I'll pause there.
Wenemo, how would you respond?
I feel like Matt shared so many gems, right? Like, I want to just punctuate this point around rest. And I think that's something that when we hear about like fighting the good fight and the ways in which our ancestors fought the good fight was in terms of doing. But I've been thinking a lot about, and like I can credit the NAP ministry for like pushing my thinking around this, is the ways in which rest is a form of resistance and really taking in moments of pause. I remember the first time I met Matt was over Zoom before I worked at Metro Center, and he told me that he went on a bike ride, like a long bike ride before getting on the call. And I think like rest doesn't have to look like, and that's like a little bit of what told me a little bit about the culture of Metro Center, is that like we are prioritizing rest, and that is a form of resistance, and that is a form of sustaining ourselves in this work. Like every morning before I get on my computer, I take a moment and I meditate, and that is my method of activism for that day before I get on and do this work. So I can't punctuate that point around rest enough, because I think we think that it's something we do to take care of ourselves, but it is a form of resistance, because our literal existence is powerful. And in order to continue to persist and exist and thrive in this world and be joyous and to continue to show up and do this work, we have to build in rest. And that could be creative rest, spiritual rest, physical rest, right? Connecting with people, so social rest, whatever that looks like for you. But I just can't punctuate that point enough as a method of resistance and activism.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you for that. As I turn again, if you haven't already, please direct your questions to the Q&A section here in the meeting. We're going to start with our first audience question from Yasmin. She asked, how do you envision transforming New York City public schools from buildings of trauma to safe spaces for all stakeholders? Matt, Wenemo, one of you.
I'm like, who's going to start with this really easy question? You want to start, Matt, and I'll jump in?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question, right? Like that's the thing I wake up thinking about regularly, and like why. So, I mean, I don't want to get too heavy into like the political layers of this, but we're in a moment where the folks who are fighting, like, and have been historically fighting for fully funded, equitable, culturally responsive, restorative, police-free schools, like those folks, those young people, those Black and brown organizers are not at the table with the new New York City administration, and they're not in good relationship with the new New York City mayor. And so there's a lack of alignment between folks who have been historically fighting for equity and justice in New York City and the current political leadership. That's part of the work EJ Rock does, is really kind of being that bridge as well. And so what I've understood from our community organizing partners, and I'll drop some links to some groups y'all should be peeping and just check in, has really been about looking, really, one of my academic godmothers, Yolanda Sila Ruiz, talks about the archaeology of self, right? And really like looking inward and doing this digging inside of us. And so I think as organizers, right, we've been thinking about what do we need to do internally to reassess and reshape our relationships and our approaches to the work, so that it's not transactional and that it's not really, it's sustainable, right? Because many wins were won in the last administration that are now being just thrown away. So I would say we need to really start building community and building knowledge one by one, right? School by school. We need to start building the capacity of educators at every single school, of young people and their parents and caregivers, to be in partnership to actually demand, racially just schools, right? And so I think that's not a helpful like strategic answer, but I know there's many organizations who are like have their fingers on the pulse of the like work, and I'll connect you all to them, and I would invite folks to join those conversations. I'll just say lastly, the New York City Council just passed a budget last week or the week before that will over 3 years cut up to $1 billion from our public schools, right? And so in a moment where we're still in a pandemic, we've also been in a pandemic that has disproportionately harmed Black and Brown New Yorkers and immigrant New Yorkers in this city. And our policy choice is to cut money out of their schools. And this is not cutting bloated administration. This is going to, like, I have a friend who's losing a job, right? Like teachers will be lost, right? And social workers will be lost. And so we as a collective, we need to really get in formation and start to demand city council members and the political leadership, mayor and the chancellor of the city, adhere to and fight for schools that deserve our kids, right? Because right now they do not deserve our kids. And as the question named, they are ultimately just trauma inducing. And so I think we need to get back to basics and start working one by one, school by school, parent by parent, student by student, to build the capacity to fight for a system that actually serves our communities better. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if it was.
All right. Wenbo, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think that's incredibly helpful. I'll give a slightly different angle on it, because I think the policy work is definitely where we're going to see the most impact. However, for those of us that are in the classrooms and running school buildings, or social workers, paraprofessionals, I'll give some kind of tangible things that I think that can be done in our schools. And I think that oftentimes when we're thinking about creating schools that are healing environments, we think about these like massive changes that need to happen, and all the things that Matt's talking about are critically important. However, there are these micro moments and micro interventions that can really create safer spaces for young people who have experienced trauma, which in reality is all of our young people, because we're coming out of this and still in this massive collective trauma that is the pandemic. Is like building in opportunities for connection. So, schools that have advisory, building in opportunities to ask young people like, hey, what's going on? How are you? Even like small, instead of like a written do now that's academic based, like have their intro question and advisory be focused on, how they're doing today. How would you describe your mood as the weather, right? Like, in a way that's accessible for them and that works for them, just like building in as many opportunities for connection as possible, because that is critical. The single most effective determinant in overcoming adverse childhood experiences or exposure to toxic stress are buffering supportive relationships. First at home, and second to that outside of the home. So if we can build in opportunities for connection, we are literally building in opportunities for healing for our young people and creating trauma-informed or healing-centered spaces. So building in as many opportunities for connection for young people with each other, with their educators, educators with each other, administrators with each other, connection. If I was going to say there's a gap, I would say there's a connection gap that we've got right now. And then secondary to that, is just building in opportunities, like as Matt mentioned, for joy and for rest, right? Like, how can we build in moments of joy and rest into our school day, into our existing system? So for educators, into our meetings, like, how do we build in joy and celebration into our meetings? How do we build in moments for creative rest into our meetings, into our classroom, right? We don't need to necessarily rethink all of our structures all at once. While I do believe in that systemic change, but while we're waiting for that to happen and while we're advocating, how can we make these tiny micro moments of joy, of celebration, of rest, of healing, so that we can get what we need in this moment? So I'll just leave y'all with that, is just to think really critically about how can we make these like small changes that could make a really big difference.
One more.
And
I'm sorry, Fabian, go ahead, please.
that's okay. No, I was just going to offer another lens, because I really appreciate how we're each offering different lenses from our different, positionalities. And I think that's really important, because everybody on this call is operating, is occupying a different space. And so the key for me, whenever thinking about these huge, overwhelming questions, and I'm really glad that you asked that big question, but it's really, what can I do from where I sit to address this big issue? And so another thing that I'll offer is, as a person who is in a position of leadership now, I don't know if folks are familiar with the framework of, Jenna Zant, Zandt, is an artist who has this lovely illustrated piece on self-care, complicating the idea of self-care, because we know nowadays that self-care, people just think of bubble baths and that sort of thing. And I'm really glad that we've also debunked that here, talking to me about the importance of rest and its different forms, and that kind of care is not just about buying things for ourselves. We don't want to just be part of capitalism and just giving into that. But there's also this concept of community care in there and structural care. And that's where I think leaders come in. So for those of you who sit in a position of leadership, one of the things that you can do is think about, structurally speaking, how can I be caring for the people who are in my community, whose jobs I oversee, whose daily operations I oversee? What are some of the structures and systems that are currently in place that are not functioning for anyone, let alone the people who need it to function the most, right? What are those things that are not functioning, and how can I push? How can I advocate? What changes can I make? Are there ways that I can make the daily life and daily existence of the educators in my building a little bit better? Where can I be fighting for them behind closed doors, where they don't even need to know that I'm advocating for them, but I'm fighting for them? And all those ways that we can actually push and change systems and structures as a way of demonstrating care for other people. It doesn't only have to be, about hugs and about cookies, which are all things that I absolutely adore. But I also adore advocating for people to have the salaries that they deserve. I also love advocating for people to have the time off that they deserve, right? So those kinds of structural changes. So I'm going to also put in a plug for that.
Oh, no, awesome. Cookies are good, but that equity is even better. Matt, did you want to add something, or? No, okay. Fabian brought up the point of leadership. One of our second questions in the Q&A asked, are principals focused on equity right now? Because that is a big hurdle in the school setting. Wenmo, I think we'll start with you in terms of a response to that question.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of meetings, and I only started working at Metro Center in April. I've had several meetings with school administrators who are looking to figure out how to prioritize equity, district level administrators who are looking to figure out how to prioritize equity. And, many of them are overwhelmed by okay, where do we start? There's so much to do. How do we start? And so many of the conversations that I have are you just have to begin somewhere, right? So much of the work is just acknowledging that there's a problem to begin with, and that in and of itself is healing and starts to work towards racial equity in these communities, right? So kind of I do a lot of anxiety leveling with administrators, because they're there's so much to do. We're so overwhelmed. We've had these incidences. We don't know what to do. So just helping them recognize that starting somewhere is really important, and by not doing anything, you're actually doing more harm. So I do think that there are a number of administrators who are prioritizing this, or know intellectually at least that they should be, and they're getting a lot of pressure. One thing that I can add is that even for the administrators who don't see this as a priority, the pressure from their staff and also their students and families to do something about this in this moment is really what's pushing them to many of them to reach out to us. So I wouldn't ever undersell the value if you're a teacher or a paraprofessional or a counselor. I just talked today to a counselor who is connecting us to her principal, and it took 3 weeks to arrange that meeting, but her principal is hearing her and hearing a committee of young people who are pushing this. So I think that pressure and that bubbling up is really pushing administrators to see the importance of this. And also young people are struggling because they don't feel like they belong in school. And so they're recognizing the connection between equity and young people's psychological safety and their performance in schools.
Thank you, Wenemo. Matt, you want anything to add to that?
Wenemo mouthed that thing. That was great. Wonderful.
Fabian, anything from you on that?
I agree with Matt.
Excellent, excellent. Another question about the school setting. What about relationships between teachers and school leaders? Again, in satisfying that equity, that responsiveness, and building that capacity. Wenemo, well, let's start with you.
Can you repeat the question? I was typing in the chat.
Oh, no, sure. What about relationships between teachers and school leaders? Can be done there to sort of build that equity, that responsiveness within the school setting.
Right. Yeah. So as a public health person, I'm always thinking about what are the upstream interventions, right? How do we intervene furthest from the problem in order to prevent the problems that we're seeing like more proximal, right? So obviously students and young people are at the center of what we're trying to do, but young people are responding to how we model those connections and those relationships with one another. They see how we treat each other. They see how we interact. They see how we divide ourselves. They see how we come together. They see how we communicate. And then also to Fabian's point around community and the importance of community, in order to do this work, we have to be able to have a community of care that leans on one another, right? So that work is really critical to sustaining the work. Many of us who've worked in schools have all seen, there's like 3 people in the school who all this work leans on, and then eventually they get burnt out or they leave, and then that work stops. In order to make sure that the responsibility of this work is shared, I was talking to Paloma today because our chief of staff, who you see her beautiful picture on the screen, but we're thinking about figuring out how we can build a community care into our work at Metro, because it's part of the work that we do outside with our schools. So building it into our own community can help us practice it, speak more authentically to it, and then also make sure that we have the energy and the motivation to continue to support the communities that we are serving.
Fantastic. Matt or Fabian, anything to add to that?
I can add something to that. I can carry forward some wisdom that I just recently picked up. So I recently attended this Leadership Institute for Women Leaders in Academia, and I learned so much. It was 9 days of intense information download. But one of the sessions that we had, we were talking about negotiating, right? And how do you negotiate for things that you want? And one of the things that our leader was sharing with us was just about understanding the other person's interests. So when you're in a relationship with someone, right? You 2 people or more, one, whatever, each of you has a different set of interests. You probably have a lot of points of convergence, but you also have some things that you're prioritizing. And so when we're thinking specifically about roles, right? Principals, school leaders are going to have a different set of things that they're prioritizing, that's on their minds, that they're thinking about, where teachers might have a different set of things on their minds. And that's cool, because in order for each of us to perform our roles well, we need to be thinking about what's at the front. So if I'm the classroom teacher, I need to be thinking about my students and and that sort of thing. And if I'm the principal, I need to be thinking about the whole big picture. And so sometimes I may miss out on something, and it's not because I'm a bad person or because I'm trying to be neglectful, but because it's just not at the front of my mind, right? So one of the things that we were encouraged to do is to always reflect and think about when I'm about to talk to this person, I'm about to be in a conversation with this person, I'm about to ask for something, I'm about to, fight for something, negotiate for something. Where's that person's values? What are their interests? Where are they sitting? What is their role? And what does that tell me about where their mindset might be? And how can I begin from that place to then say, okay, so I understand that you are right now thinking about XYZ and that you have these priorities. Let me ask you to also let me invite you to also think about this other piece. And if at this moment it's not the right time, then let's talk about when might be the right time, right? So thinking about it from that perspective of really negotiating the relationship. And again, but all of it goes back to, you are in a relationship. At the end of the day, you're talking about relationships. And so really understanding that you're dealing with another human being, and that just like you, they're going to be tired, they're going to be stressed, they're going to be worried, they're going to have all, we're all sharing the same sort of like human struggle, right? Of walking around in these bodies. So of like just being on the earth, right? I don't mean literally, but I just mean like we're all, being the state of humanity is not the easiest state to be in. So recognizing that, and then just starting from that place. So when it comes to teachers and their principals, it's sort of like, how can I put myself in this other person's place and think about what are some of the tensions that they're dealing with? How does that sit or not sit with the tensions that I'm dealing with? How can I help us find that common ground? How can I help them see where I'm coming from a little bit, so that each of us can begin to get closer toward one another? I hope that's helpful to you. I found that framework super helpful for me.
Excellent, excellent. We're running short of time. We'll be able to take one more question for our discussion. But again, if I see a couple questions in the Q&A, we will get you answers to the questions. If we don't get to it during this discussion right now. Our next question, what things can we take away from the way we currently do school to make room for centering equity, justice, and belonging? And how do we help folks get over the fear of losing out what those things we take away from? So let me rephrase that. What things can we take away from the way we currently do school to make room for centering equity and justice and belonging? Matt, let's start
I
with
can
you.
jump in. Hey, Beth. I know Beth. Great question, Beth. Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna share a link to a resource. I don't know, like I feel like Beth's question requires like a whole other panel on its own. But one thing, we had a conversation, and this was like budget related, right? But our coalition was like really thinking about, okay, like they're gonna cut money from schools. Okay, let's talk about cutting. What should we cut, right? And so we actually built out this invest divest framework for New York City public education. And so if you click on the link, you'll see there's a bunch of things we said we should divest from, right? Like we should divest from, over policing kids in schools. We should divest from standardized testing. We should divest from like racist curriculum and teaching practices, right? There's a bunch of things we should start to divest our cultures and our practices and our pedagogies from. And then on the other side of that graphic, you'll actually see there's a bunch of things we should invest in, right? And those are the initiatives around culturally responsive education, around social emotional learning, restorative practices, all of these things that we deserve, right? And that we know that actually are capable and possible. So I would say we didn't win this in this budget cycle, but I think part of the conversation was like, if we're going to be talking about cutting schools, like let's like have a really thoughtful conversation about what that means, because like there are things we should remove from our practice, and we should name those things. And then we should name what that replacement looks like, right? And so I think in my head, when I saw Beth's question, I was kind of like, all right, I immediately thought of the invest divest framing that we've been building around, because it really, I think, offers this idea that like, y'all want to cut some stuff. Like I got a list of things you can cut, right? That are causing millions of dollars of cost and harm on our young people. And I can point you to 10, 15 other things that are cheaper to invest in and more sustainable and more loving and caring, right? And so I think those types of frameworks I think have been helpful for me to think about where we cut and where we don't.
Wendell, how about you?
Well, I love this framework. I'm excited to dig into that. I think it's brilliant. So thank you for sharing that, Matt. I won't even touch the first question because Matt did that, but I'm going to touch the second question and just kind of not reiterate it fully, but I think one way that I've helped people to get over that fear is using that barbecue analogy, right? Like just by building a barbecue, which like barbecues were built for meat eaters, building that around people who don't eat meat does not take away from your experience. It just means that I'm thinking about people who have least access to this, and I'm building around them because and just helping them see that by doing this, you don't take away from this group of people. And I think that's really hard in a system that has perpetuated white supremacy forever.
Fabian, any response to that?
I don't have anything more to add to those beautiful answers that my colleagues shared. I did want to, I had noticed early on in the conversation that someone had put a question in the chat about families and how families can make contributions to curriculum. And I just wanted to touch on that real quickly because when I wear my researcher hat, my work is a lot around family school partnerships and how teachers can really collaborate with families in doing their work. So what I'll say about that is that I do think that parents have an important role to play in providing feedback and being in community with teachers around curriculum. I don't think that displaces teachers because I do think that teachers have specific and unique skills, right? These are skilled people who have studied and prepared. And so we also have to work on developing trust between families and educators so that educators can know that the teachers are putting their students, first, are putting those students' interests first, and also paying attention to the other things that they need to pay attention to. So I recognize that there is a tension there, and it's sort of a little bit inevitable that there's going to be a tension. Again, thinking about how we're sitting from different standpoints, right? So I'm thinking about my individual child, the teacher is thinking about all 30-something kids in the class, but that doesn't mean that we can't come together around the things that we know are our shared values and are our shared commitments. So finding those shared commitments and working from there, I think is where it's how we can begin to create those collaborations between families and teachers.
Those collaborations are critical. Again, thank you to everyone who has sent in a question into our Q&A. Again, if we weren't able to answer it, we will save the chat and get a response back to you. But as we are running short on time, I would like to ask the panelists to share their final thoughts with us before we conclude today's conversation. Fabian, we'll start with you.
Sorry, folks, just trying to unmute. So thanks, Pharaoh. So I'm just really thankful. I'll just reiterate, like I said, how thankful I am to be in such a wonderful community as we have at Metro with such incredible thought leaders and people who are, just every day dedicating and committing themselves to making education for our young people what we know, what it should be. The way I love the way that Matt framed it, that we should make our schools that deserve our kids, right? Schools that deserve our communities and our families. So working toward that in the community that I'm working with at Metro is just such a tremendous privilege. And I just hope that folks here who needed a little boost, a little injection of energy, of just knowing that you're not alone in the fight that you're carrying out, I hope that you got what you needed today. And we're just so happy that you were able to join us. And we look forward to having more and more of these conversations where we can continue to uplift the importance and elevate the importance of this work, but at the same time, also uplift one another and give ourselves that next little boost of energy to carry on for the next couple of weeks.
Oh, we all need that. We all could appreciate that. Matt, how about you?
Sure. Yeah. I just want to send appreciation, gratitude, and love to everyone who joined us. I know this is the harshest time of the year to be doing stuff. So just appreciation for you being here with us and sharing space. Just so much love to the Wenemo and Fabian for for me getting to be next to y'all. Y'all are dope. But yeah, I think at this point, I want folks to be real. I want to drill into your heads to rest, right? And to find some care for yourselves, because that's what I'm trying to do, right? And so please find some rest, find some care, find some joy, because y'all deserve it. Everyone deserves it. And we keep telling ourselves that we don't deserve it, but we really do. So just all the gratitude and love to folks, and please get some of that rest.
No, rest is key after a long academic year and powering up to do it again next year. So Wenemo, with that, any final words to share with the audience?
I again a note of gratitude to Matt and Fabienne, and for you, Pharaoh, for holding this conversation and creating this space and container for everything that was shared today. And just like immense gratitude for all of you for all you're doing for and with young people in your schools. And I also just want to extend some care and support. Like I said, my vision for CSS is that, we can be a community of care for folks to come to. So I'm going to share my email in the chat, just to kind of extend arms to folks. We get to support each other at Metro Center. I've not been here for that long, but I felt welcomed into this community. But I just want to welcome y'all to our community as well. So thank you so much for coming.
No, that care and support, I think that is one of the key takeaways from our discussion. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your insights with us today. To our audience, thank you for joining us. We truly appreciate you being here. After this conversation, we hope that you are empowered and better prepared to plan for your racial and social justice work in the 2022-2023 academic school year and beyond. We look forward to speaking with you again very soon. And with that, we conclude today's webinar. Be well and take care.